The latest snapshot of Canada's economy shows it slowed in the last quarter. Data from Statistics Canada shows GDP declined 0.6% between October and December. This contraction follows a period of growth in the quarter before. The shrink was largely brought on by businesses selling off goods or materials that weren't reproduced. Adam Chambers is the Conservative Party international trade critic. Welcome to the show. Let's start with your response to what we saw from Canada's fourth quarter data.
Well, look, it's unfortunate. I'm not sure it should surprise many people, though it surprised economists. If you spend time in arenas or the grocery store, you know that people are feeling the pinch, both with rising prices, but also an economy that just doesn't feel like it's growing as it should. And that's unfortunate. Rising levels of debt, consumer levels of debt were reported this week. And, it's important to remember that a year ago, the Prime Minister promised Canadians we'd have the fastest growing economy in the G7. The numbers today indicate that we actually have, the slowest growing economy in the G7, or frankly, the fastest shrinking economy in the G7. So I think, it's important to stay focused on affordability, making sure that people have more money in their pockets in order to support themselves and their families, but also push the government to reduce taxes so that it helps people, but it also keeps more money here at home and businesses to reinvest in Canada to keep the economy moving.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying about the GDP data in particular, and we'll have to point out we're talking just Q4 at this point. But what do you say to the warning from private sector economists who say this headline is not representative of the whole picture, that there's actually data, if you read right into all the data, that shows some good metrics for the Canadian economy and Canadians?
Well, again, I'm not really sure what those good metrics would be. Fewer people are working today than they were working a year ago. As I just mentioned, record levels of household debt. We had disturbing reports this week of consumer insolvencies increasing at an alarming rate. So I think, we need to stay focused. Parliamentarians and the government need to stay focused on delivering results to Canadians to ensure that an economy continues to grow. But if you look at the full year GDP numbers, this growth for the full year is not where it should be. And we need to make sure we're growing the economy to ensure that people have jobs and more money in their pockets at the end of the month.
Okay, well, some of those more positive metrics are like household spending, which rose 0.4% in the fourth quarter after declining for a while. And then on a month-on-month basis, the GDP actually grew 0.2%, up from no change in the previous month. And you also have the GDP per capita rising for the first time in quite some time. And GDP per capita is something that your party has focused on for quite some time. So it does feel a little bit like the Conservatives are cherry-picking numbers to paint a bleaker picture than what the entire report says. So I just get your response to that.
Sure. Well, look, GDP per capita peaked in this country. We're actually lower GDP per capita today than we were in 2019. It's right to be focused on those things, so that's a measure of a living standard. But if the economy is being propped up by household spending, which grew, but that spending is being supported by Canadians taking on record levels of debt, that is a concerning number. We are seeing the results of this through higher consumer insolvencies. And so if debt is supporting the increase of spending, I think that will have challenges for Canadians down the road. It makes us as a nation one of the most, if not the most indebted nation at government level and consumer levels in the G7. That means we are also susceptible to interest rate shocks. So the levels of debt that you have, higher levels of debt you have, the worse pain it will be if interest rates do not go down or in many cases rise.
You're now, the Conservatives say, and have been for a while, that we need to see results, that Canada needs results, not just talk. You have India's High Commissioner telling CBC News that India is willing to buy whatever Canada is offering on crude, on LPG, on LNG. Is that not part of getting the stability Canada needs amid the U.S. uncertainty?
Well, as Pierre had mentioned in his speech yesterday, Conservative support deepening ties with India with respect to the economy and pursuing a free trade agreement. So let's not forget that it was just in the fall that India had increased tariffs on Canadian peas and lentils. So, we want to say, or we would like to see results for Canadian producers. While some of these things they sound positive, I think we need to make sure there's follow through and execution to ensure that those results end up being delivered. It is one thing to sign an agreement to agree or a memorandum of understanding, but these are not binding trade agreements. We have said we would cooperate with the government, but to ensure results are being delivered to Canadian producers.
Well, speaking of the speech yesterday by your leader, Pierre Poilievre yesterday said that Canada needs to increase its leverage in trade talks with the United States. So what needs to come from Carney's trip to consider a success in gaining that leverage?
Well, we need to see exports rise to other countries around the world, and we can't just rely on metals and commodities to do that. There has been an increase in Canadian exports around the world, but that is primarily being driven by gold and metal prices, which have been increased. We also said, and to increase leverage with the United States, we need to increase our pipeline capacity, especially to the West Coast. We need to ensure and cut taxes for businesses and entrepreneurs in Canada when they sell a business so that that money can be reinvested in Canada and not taken out of the country. We also need to make sure that the intellectual property that is subsidized by the Canadian government or Canadian taxpayers, that intellectual property remains in this country. And we should, as Pierre had mentioned in the speech yesterday, focus on building a strategic reserve of critical minerals and those things that we know the world and the United States needs so that we can reap the maximum amount of benefits for Canadians here at home and higher paychecks for Canadian employees.
Well, now the federal government has not said it's one or the other with China and the United States. And today we're seeing the suspension of the 100% Chinese tariffs on Canadian canola, meal, and pea imports. So what's your message to Canadian farmers who may feel that would never have happened had it not been for our re-engagement with China?
Well, I would say with respect to China, I think, they're a very different economy and a different political system. Whatever our challenges are with the United States, the good thing that will come from that is, they have elections. The administration will be held accountable in their electorate. The CCP, they don't have elections. China does not have free and fair elections. And we need to be very careful about the deals that we make with them or the arrangements, especially on security that we make with them, because China has a global agenda of seeing them on the top of the world and using countries like Canada and Australia and others to supply them with raw materials and then selling us back finished goods. So, we need to be very careful about the arrangements that we're making with China. One of the things that we have said that would help protect us, Parliament 18 months ago passed the Foreign Agent Registry Bill. That is still yet to be enacted. That is a recommendation by the Hague Commission. It is a bill that has been passed by Parliament and the Senate. There's no reason why it is being delayed. These are the kinds of things that will help protect Canada, especially as it relates to some of our concerns related to national security and foreign interference.
I have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Adam Chambers, Conservative Party trade critic.
Thank you very much.